her dad came with her. He was the CEO. He is the COO of Dollar General. And he
We're
looked at-
rolling, so just.
looked
Okay.
at our curriculum and said, this is what I should have studied. And this young lady's here. Another young lady, her dad is an investment guy. Their house overlooks the Golden Gate Bridge. This is their second year. I mean, it's this kind of folk
Yeah.
we never had before.
Yeah.
And they're just enamored by the place, which is really rewarding for people like you.
Yeah, I get that a lot at the store. The people come in and wander back there. They've been told that I've got some memorabilia or something on the wall, and I get
the.
that.
Wander in, right?
That's right. It's rewarding. It's the fact that I stayed here and always wanted to come back to Oxford when I was practicing law and wasn't making any money, but had the opportunity to buy into this store and have a way to live here. So it's rewarding, but of course the challenge I have is that store that's a family-owned apparel store, making it relevant to all these new people, which is not easy, I don't think. Maybe for some people, but it's been a challenge for me.
With the chains, you have a terrific challenge.
Yeah.
But, our daughter came back and said, the only place you can get the blue jeans that are sold at Cicada is in Soho in New York.
Yeah.
And she said, there's a $900 jacket over here. So
Yeah.
people, when they came here from Texas, were just stunned by the shopping in this little town.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. We had some friends, more Patty's friends than mine, for the ball game last weekend from California. They live in Rancho Santa Fe, so that tells you right away they do it pretty.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And the lady, the one we knew, was married to a student, journalism student, and I'll get to that in a minute. But at any rate, Patty was taking them around the square, and they said, well, do you have a jewelry store in the square? And she said, no, thinking traditional jewelry. Then she remembered this Brooks collection, little doorway there, and they went in there and spent $4,000.
Oh my gosh.
And so when I see Mr. Brooks, I'm going to tell him he owes me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, me.
Well, I hijacked you. Liz, you go on.
No, well,
Yeah.
that's all right. What you all are discussing is just as interesting as anything I'm going to ask, and perhaps more so. But I was just going to start with the beginning and ask Will about his memories on campus and around campus as a boy, whatever age you want to begin.
Well, I was born in 1936, so I was 5 years old when the war started, or nearly 6 years old. One of the first memories I have of the campus was the football game between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, the end of November 1941, when I was a great fan, am now, was then, of athletics, college athletics. So I had read the paper about this game. It was a big game. We were going to play for the SEC championship, and we did. And Mississippi State won 6-0 on what might have been considered a trick play. And so they were the champions, and we were not. Junie Hovius, Merle Hapes, those people were the star of Ole Miss. And I remember this one thing that I've told somebody. I had seen the pictures of Mississippi State people in the black and white newspaper, football players, and they were wearing maroon. So that was black to me, and that was bad to me to begin with, but anyway, they're black. And so they came out in their maroon uniforms, and I was asked my father, he always got a laugh at this, why aren't they wearing their black uniforms? I'm 5 or 6 years old. My father would remind me in a gentle way that he had to, that I was crushed about the game and maybe was crying coming back across the University Bridge walking home, 1941. So the war started shortly thereafter, and I was growing up on the campus. All the men left. And I can remember with my buddies, I lived just a block off the campus, you might say, on South Fifth Street. I mean, the university was our playground.
Yeah.
The Y was wide open. They wouldn't have a lot of people to man those things. The Grove, at times, where the grass would grow up, there was really nobody to cut the grass. So much so that we could hide in the grass and play kid games, yeah. And go in the geology building to us, but now Ventress Hall.
Yeah.
And nobody to stop us would go in those turrets and hide and climb, they'd play cowboys and Indians, whatever we did. We'd hang at the Y because they had shuffleboard and they had some other game, ping pong.
Ping pong.
Yeah, ping pong. We didn't know how to play chess or checkers, but then we go over to the gym, which is now Martindale, and we could play basketball and things around there. So it was just our playground during the years 1941 to 45. Of course, we were getting older and more sophisticated, you might say. We didn't play cowboy and Indian anymore. But it was just a very nice, warm, nurturing place for me to grow up. My parents had more friends on the faculty than they had in town, I'm going to say that. Mm-hmm. The Coulters were great friends. The Butts were probably their best friends, he being the chancellor.
Yeah.
And he is an interesting man to me. And I'll talk a little bit about him if I may, because I'm afraid.
I hope you will, because my specific interest too is that you're one of the few people still around that knew Dr. Butts personally and were influenced by him and his actions in a number of ways. And he's been sort of had a rather negative
He did.
Reputation for all kinds of reasons that we both know, a lot having to do with firing the head coach. But in any case, he was a significant man in the history of this university in a way that has not been recognized. So you're on to recognize him, Will.
Well, good. I appreciate that, having that opportunity. He a little bit about him, he was a very short man in stature. He'd been to Mississippi State, which was a big mistake for him.
Well, he couldn't help it.
No, but he'd done that, and then he'd gone on to Yale Law School and became a lawyer. But went back to Mississippi State and taught political science maybe, and he was involved in the military there. It was, a military institution pretty much. He was a man of recognized ability, so he was in line to be the president of Mississippi State, but his politics weren't in line, and they selected a man named Duke Humphrey, who was perhaps a very good president. He later went on to the University of Wyoming, but at any rate, Butts was passed over. But somehow or other, his politics became better, and he became the chancellor in 36. He, of course, I have no real knowledge about anything that went on the campus. I think I've heard faculty members talk about how he pinched pennies and so forth, and Jim Silver particularly. But maybe he had to. And he did know how to play the game in Washington, and the WPA was on. The WPA built the stadium, football stadium. The WPA built the fraternity houses. They built the dormitories. I can't name them, but Hill, Long Street along there, across from the cafeteria.
Right.
And Butts knew how to do that. Now, he maybe that was not any special ability that he had over somebody else, but at any rate, those things got done. So the university was beginning to burgeon there before the Second World War. Butts got called up in the service during the war. I should say his daughter was a great friend of my sister, Mrs. Butts. I've already said that Dr. Butts was a short man in stature. It was a mutt and Jeff. She was
Rather
large. She was plump.
Right.
And
More accurate.
she was a great storyteller and dialect comedian. She would imitate voices.
Mm-hmm.
And all that was very entertaining to me. And she'd come and visit my mother in the afternoon, and I would listen to him talk. So anyway, Butts was away in the Army during the war, but he did come back about 44, 45, and was back in the swing of things. And Ole Miss had a football coach, Harry Meir, who'd been very successful before the war. He was went to Notre Dame, and he was played on those famous teams there of Newt Rockneys, and he'd been coaches elsewhere at the University of Georgia prominently, so he made what might be considered a lateral or downward move over here to Ole Miss, and it was suggested maybe he was too much of a drinker, party man, and maybe he was. That later. Well, he went down to the University of Florida with his team. The first game of 1944 or 5, let me think, 45, no, didn't play it for one of those years, at any rate. And this is, Wobble Davidson confirmed this to me, had too much to drink, didn't show up at the game. so AWOL. And
I didn't realize it was that bad.
did not show up at the game, and his job was, his coaching was taken over by somebody named Chick Wobble, again, telling me about this. Who Wobble said, who always full of opinions, should have been the coach anyway. Chick Jansowitz or something like that.
I don't remember. I'd have to call Sarah back.
Yeah, I'd have to go to the book for that one. At any rate, at the end of that season, I guess he played out the season, Butts terminated him. And Meir had had successful teams, and he had his supporters, and both on the campus, students and alumni, including some very influential ones. I'm not really sure of this, but so I shouldn't name them. But they did not check. Butts did not check with them before firing Meir. So that was, to Butts's way of thinking, wrong. But he was terminated, and he immediately went to Washington and had quite a prominent job in the Pentagon. He was in charge of ROTC, that being a combination of the Army, which he had, and the colleges, which he had. It was a big job. And we fast forward now to about 1960, when I was in the Army in San Francisco,
Right.
with the Shivers.
We used to party a bit.
Yeah, and I had this wonderful job. Well, let's go back. I was adjutant general commission there, which was sort of the administrative end of the Army, and so I learned when I was in school there in Indianapolis that there was some good jobs as couriers in these various places. State Department had just turned the business over to the Army. So a light bulb came on, I called my father, and he gave me Dr. Butts' phone number, and so I called Dr. Butts and said, he'd already said, now, William's going off the Army, if I can do anything for you. He was that sort of guy. If I can do it, you just let me know. Well, the door was open, and I ended up in San Francisco as a courier.
Not bad duty.
Not a bad duty. I can't think of anything that would have been better, really. I was flying around all over the country and on commercial planes and delivering these packages between the wars. There's absolutely no risk about any of this. Listen to me. The one time. So anyway, I go to see Butts in Washington. So, you know, I certainly owe him big time.
Right.
And come out for dinner. Well, we came out and he was loaded and ready, and so loaded both in liquor. I mean, if he didn't, but he would rail out against the authorities that Paul Johnson, the governor, he was a political man, but I don't know of any politicians that he really liked because he'd not ended up on the right side of the thing. But he particularly talked about his firing the drunken coach. And if Ole Miss could never allow the president to discipline a prominent coach without, if he doesn't show up for a game, should be fired. So anyway, we went on and on about that. But I think Butts did a lot for the university in a lot of ways. Of course, I'm on the outside looking in, but he never got the recognition for that I thought he ought to. When some lesser-known members of the Board of Trustees and others got buildings, who never did anything for Ole Miss much, got buildings named for him, he's been pretty much forgotten. His children and grandchildren came back here and were excellent students. His son, Lampkin Butts, who had gone to Yale, was a lawyer in Laurel, and he sent all of his children back here. They were perfect students.
Really?
Very good. So that's what I could say about Dr. Butts that I can think of, except he was a fiery little man, Benny Butts. I don't know how to describe him otherwise. He was just always bustling with energy and...
I didn't have this insight into him that you have for any number of reasons. I knew Mrs. Butts better, and as children, we just all thought she was extremely funny. Not that she meant to be funny.
Yeah.
It was just that she was large and hippie and very much demanding that all the faculty women do the sorts of things she thought they should be doing.
Yeah.
And so from a young faculty member's wife's child point of view, she came across as a bit of a chore to take and deal with.
I can imagine. She would imitate people's voices in the town, male and female, and it was funny. She could do it.
I never thought if we knew that side of it, I'm sure we would have.
Well, she was good. The people make quite a living doing that now, television and things. But she, to my ears, she could mimic various people.
Now, was he fired and then Bilbo went in?
No, Bilbo was dying about that time, 46.
Okay.
He was fired by the Board of Trustees. Let's see who would have been. Paul Johnson Sr., I think, was the governor because he really had it in for him. And Fielding Wright, who came he was lieutenant governor. I think I'm right about that. I could be wrong. J.D. Williams, of course, which took his place, and he was a wonderful chancellor, and everybody can agree on that. He was great, and so the university probably benefited from the change there, from a politician to more of an educator.
And Dr. and Mrs. Butts continued in the Washington area the rest of their lives. They never did come back, that I know.
Never came back to Mississippi. She was from Starkville. Her name was Lampkin, and there's a Lampkin Street over there, apparently a very prominent family.
I see.
He was not from Starkville. He was from some other place in Mississippi, small town like Sturgis or something.
Barbara lived all her time in the Washington area too, and I knew her fairly well. And her husband was the National Cotton Council.
The head man, the CEO.
Yeah, there in Washington. And
My wife worked for the Cotton Council during that time, and so
that's right.
the
I forgot.
she didn't. We had not met at that time, but she profited by the fact that he was a Mississippian and gave us some very nice promotions. Not that she didn't deserve them,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they sent her to Brussels. And at any rate, Reed Dunn was his name,
Yes, I couldn't.
and he was a university graduate.
Yeah. For a moment, I couldn't remember his name. Barbara took a very active interest in holding together a Mississippi group there in Washington, both Ole Miss and statewide.
Mm-hmm.
And she was involved in that all along, and very outgoing. And of course, Dorothy didn't live all that long. The older daughter never lived in Washington, I don't think.
Betty, Barbara, Dorothy. Dorothy had, I think, gotten a PhD to teach English lit when she died. So I suppose that's about all I knew about the Buttsies, except I thought they were entertaining people. And I guess it was because they were so unusual, Mud and Jeff, that stuck in my mind.
Well, he was operating on a different scale entirely than Chancellor Williams when he got here, who saw a way to expand and create more than we had here before.
He clearly knew how to tap the WPA money. Now, whether other presidents of other schools were able to do the same thing, I don't know. But we had a great building rush about that time, as you can imagine, the 30s, late 30s, of fraternity houses, dormitories.
And the whole faculty village
Yes,
went
yes,
up in that
yes.
same period. And it's pretty much totally gone now, but there was several families that lived and in those days you did not have to have a limit on how long you could stay. The Silvers lived in the same house
That's
the whole
right.
time he was on the faculty, and you wouldn't do that anymore. But you couldn't get any better rent deal. I forget what it was, but Mary Poole has told me it was a pretty lightweight
Yeah.
bill.
Yeah. I think some people invoke the grandfather clause even into the 21st century there, but they finally got them all out, maybe. But those were great houses.
They were, and very modern for their time.
You asked me about things during the Second World War. One of the things that I can relate, I've already said I was consumed with athletics, and before school started, these would be the years right after the war. I was a little more aware of things, I was a big 12 years old and 13, and we would go out and watch the football team practice. Everybody was very excited that we were going to have a good football team again, 46, 47. And still there was not an infrastructure there to take care of things. I mean, like another astonishing difference if you look at the retinue of people they've got out there now in the football programs. But we were wanted to, and we were allowed to be assistants to Luke, a black man who was I guess he was equipment manager of the university, and he was in charge of keeping up all the footballs and the helmets. I remember particularly we'd have to, we didn't have to, we chose to do it. We'd go around and gather up the helmets and bring them into the field house for Luke. They practiced with the Hemingway Stadium. There wasn't any There was one athletic field, practice field, and you know where it was. It was
Mostly they practiced in space right along the street as you went by. It would have been on the street side of the stadium.
stadium, exactly. At any rate, we did that, and how things were different then. In 1940, the boys were coming back from the war, and the war had interested me. And later, I did a little research into the thing. Charlie Connolly who's a big star, had been a Marine in the South Pacific. You had some real heroes in that. Buddy Bowen, who we knew, he hung around town here doing some things, and his widow lives here now. He had flown 50 missions in a Hellcat in the South Pacific. Those were carrier. Those things, the wings folded up. Good gosh, he was out there right in the midst of it. And who else? There's a guy named Bobby Oswalt who was on the team, and I can remember these people. They would talk to the boys and talk about the war. And Oswalt was a pilot. There was a guy named Hunter Gates who was a lineman. He had been a POW, prisoner of war, and here he was come back and playing college football. And I can imagine how they weren't all rah-rah like the players are now. They would, there was just a way for them to go to school. In addition to the GI Bill, they could get some money for their scholarships. And we would listen to them talk about their experiences during the war. Everybody was I'm going to say 90% of the people on the 46-7, diminishing numbers, were veterans. Yeah. They came. An interesting sidelight was what you could beat the system in a lot of ways. One of the Pooh boys, Barney Pooh, had played 7 years of college football.
That strikes me funny because I'm not sure you can get away with that anymore.
No, but what they had a rule where if you in the service, you could play on the service teams, and all these generals and admirals and everything wanted to have a good team for their So they knew he was a good player, and they had this so-called pre-fight. Johnny Vaught was a product of this. He was a coach of these pre-fight teams in the Navy, but they weren't sending him to the South Pacific. But Barney Pooh had been to Ole Miss as a freshman along with Connolly and all, and he, included in all this ability to escape really Army duty was to go to West Point. Mm-hmm. And so Barney Pooh went to West Point, and another great athlete about that time named Doug Kenner. And they were the star, obviously Notre Dame, and who had a reputation, but the Army and Navy had the best teams because they had all these. Shorty Mack Williams, who was state star, went to West Point. Nice. And so they were all on these teams, and a lot of people from Mississippi, Leon Bramlett, who ran for governor, or was it his brother from Clarksdale, was on the Navy team. Good football player. He had been to Mississippi State. Well, back to Barney Pooh. He played 2 years. I think he played 1 year of like service football at North Carolina, so they saw him as a good player. Got an appointment to West Point. And he came back here, and I've got to add up to 7, but I think I can do that. 3 years in the service, 1 year as a freshman at Ole Miss, then 2 years thereafter. I'm a year. Is that 7? Yeah, that's 7 years.
7, yeah.
He had the record. I recently saw his pictures having 7 years of college ball. He was apparently they didn't have any compunction about. If you just resigned up there at West Point, you'd come on back and play. Shorty Mack Williams was back. Mississippi State had Harper Davis, who was also at maybe not at a service academy. Arkansas had a great player, Clyde Scott, who had actually graduated from the Naval Academy, and was some sort. It was sort of a reserve officer, but that they were playing college ball. Anyway, strange time.
Well, it
Strange
seems to
time.
me that the academies would not just let these fellows go free and not fulfill some repaying obligation.
Well, I think the sense of fairness in this day and time would require that, but the brass wanted to have winning football teams, and so by golly, they had them. You know, they got to play them. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we all made that stadium and the whole athletic area very much a part of our childhood.
Yeah.
None of it was closed off. Nothing was
Nothing.
closed off at all. Now you'd have to mortgage the house to get in out there during practice. From the looks of things, we just had the run of the place as we did the rest of the campus.
We did, and I don't think during those war years, I'm not sure they sold tickets to the games. I think I know they didn't, kids could go in there and walk up and down the sideline and watch Ole Miss play. And what would happen these days if you got down there, you have to have a ticket.
I don't know, because I don't remember either. I just remember that we all headquartered over there when we wanted to make it our play place, and coaches were very tolerant and understood that we all knew enough to stay out of the way and not create problems.
Exactly. They were busy, and we stayed out of their way. But Luke, the black equipment manager, who literally, I suppose, his job today has 50 people that performing the function that Luke did. He was everything.
Raglan, I finally remembered it.
He was in charge of the buildings too, as well as equipment.
Yeah, and he took care of everything as if it were his own. And we used, Mary Ann and I, me and his daughter, used to ride around occasionally in his old truck with him. The athletic department owned this truck that he drove until it was nothing left but the frame. I don't know if you remember that, but that's who you're talking about.
Yeah.
My brother used to see some irony in the fact that his title was Water Boy, this elderly
Probably so.
gentleman.
He
He was referred to as the Water Boy.
Well, he was, whether he was referred to or not, he was a major force there. And of course, I can hear now the coaches hollering for Luke if something was wrong.
Well, he was very dedicated
Yeah.
and devoted to what he was doing. And it was, I'm sure that his, looks like a gun.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I'm just sure he gave more than anybody else might have done.
You bet. And there were a great many other dedicated employees of the university, black, that was bigger. And you know the families as well as I do, that the Bondi Webb and the Bishop Harvey, and these were people that were in food service, but they were as well respected as the professors were. And in some of the old yearbooks, and I've been a collector of them, they would have a page devoted to, of course, not in any sense of equality, but they would have certain of the servers at Gordon Hall, where they all ate, pictured, and those people, and a lot of dedicated employees, black,
Yeah. We didn't get
African American.
That's just a wind blew that open, I think. But Luke stands out in my mind because he was at it for so long.
Mm-hmm. Well, what else, Elizabeth? I remember you remember the black gentleman that drove the gangs of mowers around the campus, mule-driven.
Big John is what we call
That
him,
was
and I'm not sure of the last name.
Yeah.
Yes, he drove this huge contraption of several mowers spliced together. And I'm sure it was heavy as it could be, and he had a couple of mules pulling it.
Mules.
And the mules were a factor until people had gas. And my brother
Yeah.
remembers that the athletic department had some vehicle that they could get gas for, and he said it went around the campus gathering up the small children and taking to school. I don't ever
Remember that either.
giving a ride like that, but he says it happened.
I can remember another thing we could do freely as teenagers saying was go play golf on the golf course.
Yeah.
Just pick up and start playing. Of course, it was well, you would hardly recognize it as a golf course these days. They would John, if that was his name, would cut it with his gang mowers, and what they were in sequence maybe 2 mowers and then 2 back there and then 2 right there, as I remember, in a sort of a V.
Right.
And it was a difficult thing to maneuver.
Was the golf course there by 1936?
Oh yeah, yeah,
It's been there a long time.
yeah. It was there. William
Where it
Faulkner,
was at that time, not
Yeah.
where it is now.
yeah.
Oh, where was it?
Where the Turner Center is.
Oh, it was on campus,
Yeah, oh yeah, right there.
Behind the Smith.
towards Tadpad.
Towards that way, yeah, that was in the play. That ditch that ran down between the Tadpad and Turner, you got concrete. But if you got your ball in there, it was gone to the
Yeah,
down to the railroad. It was gone. And then a bit of where the parking lot behind the stadium is now. Of course, that street was not thought of.
So it meandered around back there and then came back in to Fraternity Row beyond the stadium.
Yeah. It was bordered by the railroad
Yeah.
cut on south and east, and then it was there until the 60s probably. I don't know.
I don't remember.
It was
either.
not a good course. We had some, strange to say, Kerry Middlecoff, who was a great golfer of the 50s, won the Masters, won the Open. Went to Ole Miss, played on that course.
I didn't know that.
Kerry Middlecoff. Yeah, he was Memphian, and he would come back occasionally in a cameo performance there. Let me see, what else might be something that I knew about.
I had hoped we would talk about Dr. Butts, and we have
Mhm.
some links and the use of the campus that we all had, and faculty members being very receptive to show kids around if there was anything they expressed an interest in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Claire Smith, she was at the time, has told me that she, like most everybody else, was wildly curious to see the cadavers.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That was a big thing. And Dr. Pankratz, who was then the dean, I think by that time he was dean, saw her snooping around. He took her through and showed her everything. And the building at that time had an elevator shaft, not with an elevator in it. It just used rope and chain to pull these specimens from the ground floor to the top floor of that building, that old science building.
Yeah.
Was supposedly a basement and 3 stories, but it would be equivalent of an 8-story building today.
Yeah. What we're talking about that the viewer might not know is the old medical school, 2-year medical school was here.
Yeah.
And there was a building where it was close to the circle where the cadavers were kept.
Well, that's the building I'm talking about.
Yeah,
That's
no.
where my father's office was.
Yeah.
Which side of the road, was it on the Ventura side or the?
South side. It was,
Toward the stadium.
yeah. It would be, what's there now? It would possibly,
Hume Hall.
I guess Hume Hall. Right in there. And the keeper of the cadavers was one Malcolm Franklin,
Well, I have stories about that too.
which is
I'll
another
add in
story.
here.
He was William Faulkner's stepson, and he was wanted to be and was a character.
He worked at it.
Yeah. He gave me my first drink of whiskey, or no, alcohol, I should say.
He brewed it out of alcohol out of the laboratory.
Yeah, he told us it was a martini. I was Dean Faulkner's age, and she was in the family, and he lived up here where Argyle Lane is now, and he invited, we may have been 12 or 13 years old, and invited us down to have a cocktail. I mean, it didn't bother him. He was amused that these 12-year-olds would have this martini. Yeah, right. It was probably grain alcohol, whatever those they used in the cadaver preservation. Yeah.
And he just helped himself. Many times my brother would follow him home to make sure he's going to get there all right, because they worked together at that time for Dr. Guyton.
Yeah.
You could see what kind of shape Malcolm was. A funny story, I'll just interject this while you're off on Malcolm, because I've just been rereading his little memoir, which is I thoroughly enjoyed.
Bitterweeds, yeah.
Bitterweeds, and the story that has to do with Christmas and the cadavers and so on. He had left word with the, I guess, Railway Express, whoever, to call him if they were coming with cadavers. And they never did call, they just delivered them to the Faulkner house.
Oh, really?
When Estelle knew what was there, she about had a fit. Somebody get these boxes out of here. I don't want them sitting on my front porch, and so Malcolm took care of it, but he had to turn to.
Malcolm thought he was entitled to the Faulkner tradition of not paying any attention to going to school or getting any degrees or anything. He didn't graduate from high school, yet he had this job, and probably was pretty good at it when he was sober.
My father thought that he was absolutely the best, because
Yeah.
he worked directly for Daddy. And
Yeah.
Daddy also was a stickler and did not let anybody get by without having their proper credentials, except Malcolm. He was fond of Malcolm.
Malcolm is a great friend of V.P. Ferguson, which is another story, which Ole Miss's first hippie. And they...
Well, that's worth telling about too, more so than things about the stadium.
Mm-hmm. He lived up here at a house and a lot that I eventually bought, mainly because of Malcolm. It was he had built in his own way a little patio down the hill, which was covered with kudzu. And the legend was he slept down there most of the time. Well, sure enough, when we killed the kudzu back and so forth, there was a cot down there. I believe that he did. He would have been hard to live with. His other interest was snakes, which of course is not easy to
Most people
like.
agree.
Yeah, he produced a snake from his pocket one time and showed it to Dean, and shocking us.
Yeah, on purpose.
Yeah,
Of course.
sure.
He was older than she was.
Yeah,
Well,
Malcolm.
He's
was-
from the first marriage.
Yeah.
How old, when would he have died?
Yeah, he went to Jackson with med school, and then he went to South Carolina. I'm gonna say he died in the 80s. I went to his funeral.
Here, did he die here?
Did I? Wait a minute.
No, he was in Charleston, where
He
he
was
lived
Charleston.
at that time,
Yeah.
Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah, I say I went to his funeral. I went to his burial, which I'll tell about. I guess it was kind of interesting, although it's a fault in the story that I'm not really shouldn't be telling, I don't think. But his sister Chocho
Yeah, I remember her.
lived here. Chocho was a piece of work too.
Indeed. I always thought
And-
Freddie Faulkner characters were patterned on Chocho, and they
Yeah.
probably were.
So some of us old time, well, the word went out that Malcolm's remains were arriving, and there would be a graveside service. I'm going to say at 2:30.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the oldest, I remember Tommy Etheridge was there, and Aston Holly and Patty and I were there. I don't know whether Dean and Larry were there or not, but anyway, we were all there. We were waiting. 3 o'clock came, and so it developed that the body was out at Chocho's, which was out in St. Andrew's Circle,
Right.
but would be coming shortly. And maybe they gave us a time that it'd be there in 30 minutes, so we all went up to Bo Murray's and sat around and talked on his pad, and then came time for the service. We went on back. No Balcom, no Chocho, no. Oh, the funeral home was there. The funeral home was.
Elliott's?
Yeah, they were in service there. I guess I don't know. Perhaps some of their crew was out to bring in the body. At any rate, finally about an hour later, it was getting dark. Chocho arrived with the body and her daughter, Vicky, and I don't know who, they had been reminiscing about Malcolm and having a lot of drinks.
Well, I was going to suggest that it's been a celebration.
I believe that Malcolm's widow was involved. She was from South Carolina,
Yes.
and
I never met her, but Mother had met her and thought she was just lovely person.
yeah, she was, and I think she had a person of some wealth and sophistication and so forth. At any rate, she ended up with Malcolm, but anyway, I was present when and he's married in the same plot with William Faulkner. This was down the hill from.
Yeah.
from
Where was Chocho's house in St. Andrew's Circle? Whose house was it next to?
She lived a couple of places. One of them, she lived 2 doors up from my sister, which is hard to tell you where it is. I don't know who lives there, but the main
My
place.
sister's house was more or less across from Hardy Crutch's
Yeah,
house.
exactly. And she lived there, but then she moved down to, just as you come in and take either a left or a right, she moved into a house that was in the curve.
Near Neighbors or Hickman, that way?
You don't get that far though.
Oh, okay.
You just take the left, and it's the
Yeah.
only house on your right, and you're going up the hill.
Let's see.
And
Well, I don't think she lived here that many years, did she?
I don't know. She was
Maybe
here, and she was a femme fatale back in her day. She was apparently very beautiful, and
Well, and she was a live wire.
Oh,
I used to hear
absolutely.
people like A.G. Bowen of that generation, her generation, say they'd all get to partying and they'd call Chocho, who was living in Manila at the time.
yeah. She had, of course, this connection in the Orient, and she married a man, and they lived in South America for a while. So she was
We lived in a lot of different places.
a lot of. She was, yeah. What else can I say about Chocho? I remember Chester McClarty's description of her. She was very alluring,
Yeah.
very alluring.
And I think she was.
Yeah.
Especially if she had
I
those
think
guys.
that covers a multitude of things.
You got a bunch of drunks in Mississippi calling you all the way to Manila.
Yeah.
You know you're alluring.
Alluring.
Oh,
Whoa.
my.
Well, that may be the end of our.
Oh, no.
I'm glad to have the rain, but
Oh,
I'm a member of Phi Delta Theta fraternity, and he was back in the day, And he sent us $2,500 when that, just out of the blue, when that was really
A lot
meant
of
something.
money.
A lot of money. But anyway, he was from Columbus, and he became a lawyer, went through Ole Miss undergraduate in law, and then he married Estelle Franklin. Of course, William Faulkner had been enamored with Estelle Franklin,
Who had allure.
alluring. But she chose Malcolm. I think her parents probably chose Malcolm. I'm sorry,
think-
Cornell, because of his prospects. And William Faulkner had very little prospects.
No prospects that anybody could identify at that time.
Yeah.
And then the only place he could get married was College Hill Church,
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, there's an iron.
because they
there.
wouldn't marry a divorced person.
Presbyterians being what they are, never mind you two.
Yeah.
We apologize.
Married by Dr. Helliston out there.
Yeah.
Actually married in his front. I think he was afraid to marry him in the church. He'd married him at his house.
I heard you and other people say that, and
Yeah.
I've never.
Say that again? They really didn't get married at College Hill then?
At his house, which was out there.
Oh, okay.
It's
The minister's house.
minister's house.
The man's.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
across the street, more or less, from the
Mhm,
church.
down the way.
Well, we just may have to have a continuation of this.
On
because-
Cornell Franklin, yeah. He was considered Tommy Etheridge said he was Tommy was something of a contemporary fraternity brother also
Mhm.
of Cornell. But no, he would have been younger. At any rate, he, a lawyer, had a very responsible position there. I don't think he worked for the government, but he was involved in imports and exports, and he was wealthy.
In Singapore?
Singapore. And, of course, this is, no, in Shanghai. Shanghai.
I meant Shanghai.
Shanghai. And, of course, no, you don't, of course, you don't know this. But Estelle and the two children came home, and there was not much money in the Faulkner side of the family. Neither was there much money in the Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the
Oldham.
Oldhams. He'd been a Republican and appointee, and the Republicans were out of power, and so there was not much money. So it was rumored, and I think it's pretty good authority, that both families were glad to have the stipend that Cornell sent home from Shanghai to take care of his children.
I see. Mhm.
And they were both very glad to have the money. Maybe he even generously, because he was a wealthy man, sent them some money to live on. I don't know.
Well, one little footnote on Malcolm, just among the memories of his little house and his entertainment there. He used to serve drinks in the most exquisite little jade cups that I have ever seen. I've always wondered what became of those, whether his son inherited them.
Yeah, I wonder. He had, my mother used to say that Estelle had these beautiful silk garments and things from the Orient that, I don't know whether she'd sent them, that had been sent, she came home with it or not, but no, this would have been much later. So Cornell Franklin, I think, continued to take care of the family in a pretty good style. Never married again. That was,
He did not.
I believe I'm right about that.
I'm not sure. I was kind of thinking he had, but I could be mistaken.
I could be mistaken about that then.
Because there was, I had the feeling from something Mother used to tell, the lady gossip around this town, that Cornell and his new wife would come to visit at Roanoke and would stay there. And Faulkner would go sleep in the barn. He was not,
I hadn't heard that one.
so I don't know what.
I do know that Cho-Cho, of course, would in the 50s and 60s, and she would come in with her husband, who was Bill Fielding,
Yeah,
who was very wealthy because he was a executive with the Philip Morris Cigarette Company, a job that probably would not pay you very much these days.
well,
Oh, I don't know, selling it overseas. And he lived in South America, so I don't know what he was doing down there, maybe in charge of selling tobacco down that way.
could have been.
But that's, I know he was involved with some tobacco company, but whether it's Philip Morris or.
Well, when you two were born, there was a guy living where Sears used to be. Had a house right at the end of North Lamar.
Mr. Parks.
Who was it?
Mr. Parks.
Parks.
And was he the one they modeled the Snopes after?
Not that I know.
No, I wouldn't
He was
think so.
president of the bank?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it was, if I had well, it was, I'm trying to think, somebody, predecessor of Park. But maybe it was Park, let's just say it was Park, because he was from that neck of the woods out there in Beat 3 or 4 where
yeah.
Faulkner made Clem Snopes come from. Maybe it was Parks.
I just never had heard that, but there's no reason I would.
There's a lot of people that, I want to say there was maybe someone, of course all of his characters are a combination of people.
Now that house, when would it have been torn down, and when would that shopping mall, you didn't have malls here
No,
until
no.
when?
We'll say 60s.
In the 60s?
John Tatum did it, and it was a fine old rambling house, and that's where, I'm not sure that LQ lived there, but his father-in-law, who's the,
Thompson?
Chancellor of the University, what was his name? He lived there.
Longstreet.
Mm-hmm.
In Long Street?
Mm-hmm. But at any rate, it was a very old house and rambling big old
Now,
thing.
was it sunk down off the road?
No.
It was up, wasn't it? So
It
you could
was
see it at the
yeah.
end of the road.
Yeah, you'd be looking directly across from Dorothy Lee's house.
Yeah. Yeah, they dug that out when they tore that down. Yeah, it was just, you know, the road takes a right, a little bit of
Yeah.
a veer to the right. It was what you saw.
Yeah. So it was sort of right by where Tatum's house was.
Well, it faced, I'm going to say it faced, would you agree, Elizabeth, it faced South Lamar.
Yeah, that's.
I mean,
that's
it
what I
faced,
read.
faced down the street,
Right.
Yes.
North Lamar.
Yeah, North Lamar.
Yeah,
It faced south down North Lamar.
yeah.
Yeah, so it would have been directly opposite the, Dorothy Lee's house, because it would have been offset a little bit where Dorothy Lee sits back.
Yeah.
Would it have been a Greek revival, or what would it have looked like?
No, I think it was, I don't remember it having much style, but it was a
I
big
don't
one.
either, I remember it just being a typical older house, such as you would see
yeah,
some
rambling,
still on
yeah.
South Lamar. I think particularly now, right now, of Jim Pryor's house, it would have been of that period, or the house next door to me here.
Mhm.
It would have been, it didn't have any columns, any grandeur about it at all. Just a big rambling.
Big
house.
old rambling house.
Well, I sure hope you'll talk about some of the characters in town.
I'm gonna run out of, I'm not gonna live long enough to do all that.
Well, I'm just interested in hearing you, whatever you write, but you all lived when there were some really characters, some really interesting guys in this town.
There were more people of more interest than I knew. Once Billy Ross and I were talking, and he likes to visit with me because I remember all these people. I
Yeah.
don't think he necessarily has a lot of people he wants to visit with.
No, he's right.
But
That's right.
we were talking, and I was remembering a man.
Are we on now, by chance?
No.
Well,
We
good.
are? Okay.
Well, that's
He's
good.
got
That's-
batteries.
He got
Okay, that's
batteries,
good. That's
okay.
good.
Anyway, where was I headed with this story? Oh, somebody that had a decided lope in the way that he walked. so you'd see him going to the campus and he's loping along. And we always, as kids, thought that was so funny. And Billy Ross said, well, you probably didn't know, he likes little boys. I said, no, I didn't know anything about that.
Well, yeah, you're talking about, he appears in John McCrady's paintings, lived down here, Socrates Gladden. Is that
That's
not?
what I'm talking about, lives where the gift shop.
Oh, where? The gift shop?
Uh-huh.
Well, maybe so. I don't know. He lived on South Lamar somewhere. But he appears in, I hate to characterize this, but he was sort of limp wrist in John McCrady's paintings that were in our house, and then, well, they're in the Bank of Oxford, then our house, then the downtown grill, and I gave them to the university.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, in front of, it's very clearly Socrates Gladden.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, I don't know that he was interested in young boys, but he was interested in men. So,
Now, did both of you ever interact with Phil Stone?
not I.
Yes,
Well,
no.
Well, yes, no, not really, not me, the man. He was, when he, a very significant event in my father's life was the death of Kate Skipwith in the renunciation of the attempt to break the will. Phil Stone had been Miss Kate Skipwith's lawyer, and he was, if not completely paranoid, he was going that way. Mm-hmm. And my father had to step up along with others and have him committed, along with, certainly had his Emily Whitehurst Stone's approval. He was just completely wacko. When the trial was coming up about the will, and so they got Glenn Fayette in from Holly Springs, and he saved the day. But that, I do know that he carried a pistol around with him. He's paranoid. He thought everybody was trying to get him, and would display it. Let you see that he was packing.
You talking about Phil?
Huh? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
He was packing, and
I remember him because for a time when I was a child, they were very active at St. Peter's,
mm-hmm.
regular churchgoers,
Mm-hmm.
and we all used to make so much fun of her hats, and he prided himself on the fact that he had chosen all her hats, and he made a big deal out of it, and we all thought that was about as hilarious as it could get.
His son, Phil Jr.,
Yeah.
was a bit of a, I don't know, what shall we say? He attracted a lot of interest around town because he was very strange. He was
eccentric.
Eccentric. He would skip rather than walk, and that, of course, brought derision from his contemporaries. He would skip around, and he went to Harvard and had a book published, which everybody, no question in anybody's mind around here that his mother had written it. Mm-hmm. And and it did have a lot of local lore in it that he wouldn't have known about.
And his sister wrote the book on Duncan Gray.
Mm-hmm. Araminta.
She was several years younger than Philip.
Yeah.
And Philip was always just sort of a strange kid. Everything about his behavior and his mannerisms. And he was extremely scholarly, and I'm sure was directed that way by his mother. he spent half his life, if not more, in the university library. He
Indeed.
worked away at whatever he was working on and showing an interest in. So I'm guessing he's one of these people that sits on the border between being brilliant and being just
Yeah.
peculiar.
He would have been a little younger than you all.
Yeah, both of us. He would have been, by how many years I'd have to
Yeah.
figure.
I'm gonna guess. Gosh, that's hard. I would guess he was born about 1940. That would have made him 20 years old in 1960. And I think he's about 20.
40s. I would have guessed also
About
the
40.
40s.
Yeah.
So now, you all had Duval as a friend,
Yes.
Indeed, we did.
We both did.
and he was born in Oxford?
No.
His family was from Tupelo, as far as I know.
He was, but they were living in Alabama, and his father had some. I think Howard was born over that way somewhere.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. At any rate, he came to Oxford. His father came to work managed the shoe department at Nelson's store. And after a number of years, he moved on. He became a traveling salesman. Howard came, I guess.
I'm guessing when we were in sort of middle school, I mean, maybe 5th or 6th grade, but he and I were in the same grade.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember his being around very much until we got to junior high school.
Yeah. I think, I want to say it was during the war. Howard, a great storyteller, would regale us, has regale about his experiences at the Tupelo tornado in 1936, and a close study would reveal that he was not alive. Yeah. But Howard, that never bothered me. I always liked that about Howard, the stories he would tell, whether they were true or
Well,
not.
he was kind of hemmed in by the truth. And that's what made it so amusing and delightful, and the fact that he would adjust those stories as it suited him.
And and it doesn't bother him that you might have been present when this event occurred and could remember, and this would be my case, that it happened in many parts entirely differently. Mm-hmm. But that didn't bother him. I mean, the fact that you might. Our friend Billy Ross Brown never could accept that about Howard. He would get mad when he would and tell Howard that Howard is lying. That did not happen that way. But
Bounce off his back.
it bounced off his back. But he was a great fellow and a great friend, and I miss him dearly. I do.
I do too. It was just a tragedy, I felt, for him to take his life, and we're getting off on strictly personal stuff now, but I remember you saying at some point, I didn't understand it when you said it, but I do now, and you may not remember saying it. You said, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive him.
Yeah.
But,
Mm-hmm.
he could be a joy to be around.
Mm-hmm. And he did a lot of good things. He never liked to be hemmed in by the truth or anything else, but he I think it's fair to say that he took Cofield's photo collection and made something out of it. I mean, it was just all in boxes over there. And he went in there and of course, getting Cofield profited from that, but the so-called colonel never was anything for management. And he would, of course, had photographed the Faulkner family, but the town a great deal. But Howard had many wonderful to travel with him. I've taken trips with him just around the county. He knew just around this bend that there's a man that raised goats and stuff that, that wasn't a story. I mean, he would know things about the county that he had to teach me. Now, I don't know where he got all that, but he got it somewhere.
Made it up?
No, a lot of it proved to be true. But he wasn't afraid to pass on a little idle conversation.
Indeed.
Yeah, it's been described. But I wrote to him. He loved Virginia. And my son went to Washington Lee, and we would go visit him. And Howard said, "Well, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to ride up there with you, And so, yeah, wonderful. 2 or 3 times he did that. And he could take you on back roads in Tennessee and Virginia that he'd been on, and there was significant, things to see there. I mean, they might not have been real events in history, but they were, it was worth. I was entitled to love to travel with him. He'd been in Washington in the Army, in the Air Force with Geraldine, and they had ridden back and forth from Washington to Oxford, and that's where he got all that knowledge, I'm sure.
Well, a side note on that too, when they were living there, and he was, his duty was at, I was going to say Fort Detrick, that's not right, but maybe Fort Meade in Maryland, out on the northeast end of Washington.
Mm-hmm.
He would not consider living anywhere but Virginia, which meant he was having to drive clear across all that mileage every day to go to work, but that's what he chose to do.
Yeah, Howard, I like to quote this about him. My friend Lewis Brandt made a lot of money and bought a farm out here and built a big house, and it was either cut them or it didn't have any pine trees on it. It was all hardwood trees and rolling. And Howard would sit up there on the porch and have a drink and say, "This is Mississippi like it ought to be," which meant it was just like Virginia. It wasn't like Mississippi at all. It didn't have any pine trees. It was just Mississippi like it ought to be.
Like he wished.
Yeah, that was his dream. Yeah.
Well, your store was the anchor on that square for a long time, particularly after the grocery stores went, etc.
Yeah.
Tell the story about what it was like for you as a child at the store.
To go up the store?
Maybe this isn't where, I'm just interested. I don't know if you've asked all your questions.
It's all right. My questions are rambling and can be edited and amended at any point.
Well, I can take that. It was such a very comfortable thing, that store. Everybody knew, all the people knew all the customers, and I could walk around and go back to the shoe stocks and do anything I wanted to do up there.
Mm-hmm.
Did people like Liz go up and fool around in the store?
I don't think so. No, it was just because of me. My father was, no.
No, my mother shopped there all the time, and I have to some extent. But they also, at that point, handled and sold a lot of fabric and patterns to people who were going to make clothing themselves, which was very common, or hire somebody else to make something.
Mm-hmm. Very common then. And that's one of the first things that Olivia and I threw out when we brought the Nelsons out, with piece good department, which is not profitable. But I will, because we were talking about Howard Duval, I'd like to mention this.
Sure.
When the malls came to Oxford and everybody was, the mall, the shopping centers, everything, everybody was, John Tatum, who built the shopping center north of town, predicted to Howard and to me that, you just better come on out there and build let me rent you a store. John was a decent fellow, but he was selling. But we weren't buying. We had a thing about the square. And so Howard and I were going to stick it out. We were property owners, and the whole, it was just everybody would come to town with a little project, would come in and put their project before me, and I would decline, and then they'd tell me that they're going to run me out of business. So I'm still here, and they're gone. The mall that is vacant and the university owns part of,
Right,
maybe all of, I don't know,
I'm not sure.
was the biggest threat, and they wanted a government subsidy to put that in, because this was in Jimmy Carter's days, and I'm gonna say anyway, it's free money, a lot of free money out there, and they could have their loan to build it subsidized down to 1% or something, and what was that called? But Howard and I objected. It didn't take me 2 minutes. One call to Thad Cochran's office, and one of his assistants said, "Well, all you got to do is object. They're not, if anybody objects to taking this money, the federal government's not going to send it down." So you had to have a hearing, and Howard and I went and objected. And sure enough, that was all it took it just never heard any more about it. Them getting the money. But we interviewed by the paper. We had to, at that time, both of us differently, and Aston Holly was helpful in this. Payne Sneed, I think, had already left the square, and I remember Mitz was interviewed. At any rate, we tried to say, well, we think, maybe it's right. Maybe all the business is going out there, but we're going to stick it out here, and we can manage our business, and we own our property, and we're not going to move. We're not going to put anything out there. And as things developed, people became more enamored with the ambience of the square than they would be strip commercial or the malls and so forth. Now, not to say that we have the same market share of the business that we used to, not by a long shot. But at any rate, we've been able to survive. And Howard was a good part of that.
And the square has been upgraded the way it looks far more elegant than it ever did in earlier days.
And we would want to do just a little something. Let me see, decorate the square at Christmas with city money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the shopping center people would object, and no, you can't spend the money. We want you to do us too. Well, now, I believe that, and I hope that they're going to spend the money to build a parking garage down there, and everybody will applaud it because they want to keep the square like it is. I hope they'll do that. But my job is to make it more relevant to the customers, which is not that easy. And I don't understand, but I hope my daughter will be able to do that. But at any rate, there's a great deal of, back in the day, in the 70s, there was a great bit of rivalry between the chain stores in the malls and their property owners and folks on the square. We weathered that, though, I think.
Well, I think that's part of the good.
Mm-hmm.
And people want to come to Oxford to shop because of the environment of the square.
Yeah, small.
Because my daughter says they want to come to Oxford and shop and pay 20% more, so be it.
Yeah.
They're not coming to shop in the strip mall that has nothing to want to.
Well, it's like where they came from.
Huh?
It's like where they came from. That's why we just overcome with business on these football weekends. People that have gone to school here and only have chain stores to shop at
Right.
want to come back and do it. Well, we've rolled on here at some length. I don't know.
Well, I'm.
Yeah, I'm starting to lose what little light I have. We were pretty good there for a while after the lights went off, but now
Yeah.
Well, it's
now you're
getting.
kind of looking spooky.
Well, it's
Yeah.
getting dark out
It is.
there. I don't even know what time it is. It's